To access the grid tab, we first need to go into the program preferences. And so we'll click on this icon right here for program preferences. And we need to go to the grid tab. Once inside here, you'll see all the different things that you can do to a grid. And we have spacing section, we have a grid major, we have a style, and we have some options here for snapping to the grid, guidelines, anchors, and snapping to move. So let's go ahead and first turn the grid on. And so with the grid on, you can see in the background you have this lighter gray like dotted line. Then you have these, it's kind of a purple color for this bigger outline here. It's every so many grid blocks is how this kind of works, and I'll show you inside the preferences here. If I go to program preferences and we go back to the grid, we have spacing right here. This is the amount of spacing for each box that you see here. So it's every 3.18 millimeters. So if I want this to be 10 millimeters, I can make it a different vertical. That's horizontal. I can make it a different vertical than horizontal, but typically you do it as a square, so you put in 10 and 10. The next thing is this color. So this gray color is what you see for this dotted line here, or dashed line. And you can change that color to something else. So we'll choose green just so we can take a look at that. The next thing is grid major, and what this is saying, every so many numbers of lines, it's going to place one of these major grid lines. So you can see that every 10, it's going to place one horizontally, and every 10 boxes here is going to place one vertically. So if we change that to 5 and 5, and it could be a different number, you could do 5 for horizontal and 10 for vertical. I'll keep this at purple so we can see this line here, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. So what you see here now is these lines are now in green as opposed to the gray, and this purple line is every 5 grid boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you see another horizontal line or vertical line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, another one. If you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it places, there's another grid major line. So that's how those work. I'm going back into the program preferences and going to grid. I'm going to change this back to the gray color. Sometimes I like to use this little darker shade of the gray. And the next thing is showing these lines right here. We can show them as dashed lines, as you see here, or I could do it as solid lines. If I choose solid lines, keep in mind I change this back to gray, that it's now going to be solid lines that you see, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to see the purple, but that is an option that you do have. Go to program preferences and go to the grid, and I can also show them as dots, and this is like, you don't see it nearly as well when it's at dots, and it doesn't show the grid major lines, but it'll just show you little dots on the screen. The other way to access grid settings, you don't have to go to program preferences. You can right click on the ruler itself. So I just right mouse click and I can go to grid settings, and it will open up just the grid tab, as you can see here. So you don't see all the other program preferences. This is one of the only ones that works this way, is the grid. So I'm going to put this back to show it as dashed lines, and I'm going to change this back to where it's at 10 and 10, and I have the color where I want it. The next things we have are snap to grid, snap to guidelines, snap to anchors, and snap to move. So to show you what that means, I'm going to first bring this back, because this is available in the right click options up here. So remember that snap to grid, guidelines, anchors, and move. If I right click on this ruler, I can go right to snap to grid, snap to guidelines, snap to anchors, and snap to move if I have the snap to grid selected. So let's go ahead and do a snap to grid. and we'll take a look at that. I'll grab the artwork tool, and what will happen is when I get the mouse pointer close to the grid line, it will automatically snap to the line. You can see there it just snapped right in there. If I place cursor right here, you can see that it's not right on this line, but if I left click, it's going to snap to it. So it makes it easy to make sure that you get a very exact placement when you're creating something. So that's snap to grid. If with that selected, I can do snap to move, and snap to move will, as I move something, it will automatically snap it. You can see it just like kind of snaps to the line, and just to make it a really accurate way of moving. These are all things you have to be careful with, because sometimes if you don't have the grid open and viewable, it still is going to do it. It's still going to snap to a grid, because even if you turn the view off, the grid is still there, and if you have a snap to grid selected, it's going to snap to it. And that can get people in trouble when they're digitizing something and they don't realize that they have snap to grid on. They'll go to create something and wonder why the line's moving. So to show you what I mean by that, I'm going to go ahead and click that off here. I'm going to turn off the view of the grid, and I'm going to go to my run stitch tool, and I'm going to click, and notice that where my mouse is, it's not putting the point right where the mouse is. What it's doing is it's snapping to that grid. So if I turn the grid back on, you'll notice it'll be right on those grid points. So that's what I'm saying by you have to be kind of careful. The other thing is snap to guidelines. And I'm going to turn the grid view off right now, and we'll go to snap to guidelines. And guidelines are created by clicking and dragging on the ruler. And you can create as many guidelines as you want, vertically and horizontally. And with a snap to guidelines on, it's the same thing as basically like snap to grid. And when I get close to it, it's going to automatically snap to it. I need to turn snap to grid off and just have snap to guidelines. So you can see that it's going to go right to that line. And if I have it in a corner, it'll go right to the corner of the guideline. But even if I click right here, it's just going to make sure it places it on the guideline. It's just another way of easily getting things positioned where you need them. I use guidelines quite a bit, and I will snap to guidelines quite a bit. Snap to anchors is much different. Anchors are these right here. So these are your anchor points. So if I come in and I'm going to create something else, when I get close to it, it's just going to click right over the top of the other point. So if I right mouse click now, it looks like I didn't do anything, but if I click and drag this off, it created that same line. It just snapped to the anchors of the other object that it was closest to. So that's something that is kind of high level, that there's not a lot of use cases for it, but you have the ability to do it. So I'm going to turn those off. And those are the different snap to features and how they work. And so if I go back to program preferences, the grid, we've covered all of these different things that you can do with the grid.